And it's my great pleasure today to welcome Heidi Julavits to campus to read from her work. If you could take a second to please silence your cell phones, that would be wonderful. So Heidi Julavits is the author of 4 highly acclaimed and wonderful novels, including The Vanishers and The Uses of Enchantment. And her fiction has appeared in Harper's Magazine, McSweeney's, and the Best American Short Stories. She's the founding editor of The Believer magazine and the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, and she lives in Manhattan and teaches at Columbia University. Of her most recent book, The Folded Clock, a diary, from which she will be reading today, and it's for sale over there. I'm sure she'd be happy to sign, draw pictures on it, etc. Of this book, the wonderful writer Julavits had this to say. This is a diary in the way that Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater is a confession, or that Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year is a journal. This is a work so artful that it appears to be without artifice. This diary is a record of the interior weather of an adept thinker. In it, the mundane is rendered extraordinary through the alchemy of effortless prose. It is a work in which the self is both lost and found, but above all, made. This book is about many things, but it takes time as its project. I read it this summer, back when I felt like I actually had time to do things like read books, and I fell in love with it in a way that I still don't fully understand. It's structured like a diary, so it's split into these dated entries, each entry always beginning with a today I, such as, today I took my kids to the cemetery to talk to E.B. White. Today I gossiped with a new friend about the illness of a woman we scarcely knew. Today I am not going to a yard sale. But the chronology is scrambled, and the entries do not flow sequentially, but they rather dive and swoop in a light at some point in this writer's life, and then shift. The next entry might be dated 3 months later, or 2 weeks before the entry you've just read. It's a strangely thrilling move. It's strangely thrilling to move through someone, a stranger's life like this, to wormhole from one emotional state to another, from one fixation to another, and to watch a very personal book of days being assembled right before your eyes. It collapses time, it flattens it, but it also opens up vistas large enough to swim through and to linger in. It's a weird pleasure and a weird effect. And this book is almost impossible to put down. Some of this has to do with surprise. Each entry opens up an entirely new concern, fixation, problem, emotional state, and part of you just simply wants to know what's coming next. But I think the reason I couldn't put this book down was even simpler than that, and it had to do with the way this collage was assembled. Once we have been freed as readers from worrying about how plot functions in relation to time, we become more attuned to the ways in which thought erects scaffolding around the present moment and gives shape and plausibility to a particular emotional topography. In other words, reading this book felt like coming to know someone in a way that I've never experienced in a book before. It was a shock for me. It's a book about trust in art, ambition in love, of loneliness and parenthood, the small secret humiliations and triumphs of marriage, of travel and dislocation, about writing and reading and seeing, the texture of 2 years passing. Objects swell with meaning. Reality television is taken seriously. It's just a pleasure to be in the company of someone who thinks the way this writer does. And we're pleased and lucky to have her with us here today. So please help me welcome Heidi Julavits.
Thank you, Ethan. I told Ethan he didn't have to change his shirt before he gave his introduction, and I feel like he made the right move. I like that shirt. Did you guys like that shirt?
Yeah, but the other one was amazing.
I know, the other one was just so awesome. So thank you so much. It means so much to be here, not least because I'm a huge admirer of Ethan's work. Did they know you as Ethan? Professor Rutherford?
Yeah.
Commodore Rutherford. And I was actually thinking you were going to say, so we know each other because we are writers, but we also know each other because his aunt and uncle live in the same small town where I go in the summer. And I thought you were going to say, and really the reason I was reading this was to see like what kind of crap you were going to talk about my aunt and uncle. It's a very small town. There aren't that many people to talk about, so they are in there. Okay, so, and I thank you so much for that introduction. I have to say, we sort of started to swim around this while I was eating an afternoon egg sandwich after taking the Greyhound up here, which you guys don't do that if you have the option. Don't do that. You can, yeah, anyways, I was about to tell you that I had this I had a weird panel experience last night, and I feel like if I had been able to articulate myself the way you just articulated what I did, I think I would feel slightly better. I just sounded like I actually hadn't even written this book. When people asked me about it, I was like, so, okay, I have a couple of things I was thinking of reading to you guys, but I thought I would actually open it up to a vote. Okay, so I could read about reality TV. This has already been publicized as a possibility. I was between reality TV and Edie Sedgwick. Do you guys know who she is?
She used to work here.
Shut up. What? Did she?
Really?
What do you mean she used to work here?
She did.
As a what? What did she do?
For just a year.
Really? Truly? Okay, well.
We're a lot cooler than it seems.
So much cooler. Okay, so preferences, Edie or reality TV? Edie? Edie, okay, all right. You guys said it. That's what we're doing. With this selection, you also win a little bit about a Hollywood director who, if you push me, I'll tell you some of the actual identities of these people, but they have been all altered. So yeah, partially what the artfulness, I'll put it in quotes a tiny bit, since you could also call it cowardice, is I did my best to change everybody's identities so that people wouldn't feel badly that I was talking trash about them or saying mean things about them. And in the end, I kind of got in trouble for doing this because I so altered people's identities that people who I hadn't written about thought they were in the book because the altered identity resembled a person who it actually wasn't meant to resemble. Okay, so this is January 5th. And I'll just quickly, do you guys know who the Goncourt brothers are? They're these dudes who wrote journals. They also wrote novels. They hung out with Flaubert. They were super, super bitchy. And they're sort of known more for the journals that they kept than they are known for their novels. So there's something slightly tragic about that maybe, and I'm following in their footsteps maybe. Okay, January 5th. Today I tried again to read the Goncourts. I know I said I'd definitively given up on them, but this is the beauty or the lameness of me. There's no shortage of second chances. Every petty, embittered person should want to date me. Every petty, embittered person should write a book I hate, because I'll keep trying to read it. It has been a few months since I gave up on the Goncourts. Today I thought about them. Maybe they'd changed. Or maybe I'd changed. I reread books to measure my degree of difference from myself. During my 20s and 30s, the book I reread most often was a biography by Jean Stein, edited with George Plimpton, called Edie, an American biography. Has anyone read this book, by the way? Oh, you guys, go and read this book. It is so, so good. Edie Sedgwick, often described as one of Warhol's factory girls. This is my description. A shocking number of people do not know who Edie Sedgwick is. Lived a fast, sad life, dead at 28 of a drug overdose. Despite my PhD level familiarity with all extant images of Edie Sedgwick, the images that appear in my head when I think of her are two. One, with a peroxided pixie cut, doing a ballet move atop a coffee table in black tights. And two, head cocked like a cute dog, hair long and brown, looking up at the camera, wearing a flowered normal dress. Between these two images exists the identity spectrum she traveled during her life, though this does not take into account certain images further out on the spectrum. For example, stills of her topless and drugged out at the bottom of an empty swimming pool from the film Ciao Manhattan, or shots of her immediately following the Chelsea hotel fire, her burned hands wrapped in dirty gauze, looking like a boxer wearing too much eye makeup, and also, though not by human forces beyond herself, defeated. I first read Edie in college. My roommate found a copy in a dingy, low-rent part of Vermont, a part that hugs the railway lines and the river, a part where it is always, psychically speaking, mud season. Among the old towels and the kitchen tin, she found this book. It was out of print. So far as we knew, there was only one remaining copy in the world. My roommates and I all read it. We all wanted to move to New York and be lauded and exploited by an artist and wear black tights and little else. Ambitious though we were, this one time we dreamed about becoming famous for having produced or accomplished nothing. Also, Edie and I shared a birthday. This coincidence was the equivalent in my mind of a knighting. Clearly, I was destined to be Edie's successor. This also meant Edie, like me, shared a birthday with Hitler. Somewhere within our essences, the ones determined by constellations, we might harbor a dormant evil. A mutation of circumstance could set it off. Could we safely endure for a lifetime without waking it? Edie maybe didn't think so. I felt it was important to study her and to learn perhaps how to better cope with our cosmic birthday inheritance. But really what I studied was how I might fulfill a fantasy I never knew I had until I read Edie. I wanted people to want to photograph me because I represented energy, cultural energy. I wanted to possess and transmit cultural energy that ideally wouldn't produce another National Socialist movement. I guess, thinking more broadly, Edie didn't produce or accomplish much, but she did exude. Why get hung up on production and material accomplishment? Let's look at what Hitler produced and accomplished, and let's wish he had slightly less of a production and accomplishment fetish. Who cares about a bunch of books? Edie left spooky and beautiful images of herself. That is more than I've managed to do. Later, when the internet happened, I bought my own copy of Edie. It remained my practice to regularly read it because every time I did, my reaction was different. I could use it as a barometer of who I no longer was. Early 20s, I want to be Edie. I want to be a drug addict. I want to end up at the bottom of a swimming pool with a male model cooking my dirty underpants in a cauldron. Mid-20s, these earlier goals start to seem somewhat less like goals. Late 20s, Edie and also Warhol are starting to bug me. I covet only Edie's body and her earrings. 30, I decide that all of Edie's problems are because she comes from old money, and I've been developing theories about money and how money, especially old money, can be bad for children, even though all I ever wanted as a child was to come from old money. Early 30s, I feel guilty for thinking so harshly of Edie. I see her as pitiable, a product of bad parenting because a seriously crazy bunch of humans raised that girl. Her father was vain and also possibly, probably, definitely molested her. He was an obsessive tanner. His nickname was Duke. The children called him Fuzzy. One of her brothers killed himself. Another died in a motorcycle accident. Mid-30s, I start to get interested less in Edie the life than I am in the structure of Edie the book. The many gossipy voices all talking about Edie. The book is an oral history, i.e. a bunch of interviews edited into what appears to be a continuous conversation among people. I think to myself, someday I'm going to steal this structure. Around this time, I loaned my copy to a good friend. I kept the dust jacket because I didn't want her to tear it. 10 years later, the dust jacket is all I possess. Acquaintances return books. Friends never do. Fortunately, at a public reading I gave around the time I last saw my copy of Edie, I mentioned during the Q&A that the book I most treasured was Edie. A woman in the audience emailed me the next day. She was a novelist. She'd been asked to write the screenplay to an Edie Sedgwick biopic. She offered to hook me up with the director in case I might want to write the screenplay in her stead. I didn't want to write it, but I did want to meet the director. The director had known Edie in her worst days. He'd been criticized by some for taking advantage of her at her most pathetic and putting the sad spectacle on film. Also, I was about to spend a month in LA where the director now lived. I contacted him. I told him I was very interested in his project. Hollywood, in my scant experience, is an industry consisting of projects, defined similarly to the way Mainers define projects. Passionate enthusiasm and commitment is expressed in the name of negligible material results. 12 years after buying the lumber for his porch project, my neighbor still hasn't built his porch. After a while, the lack of a porch is not a daily reminder of what should be, but of what might be. It's a form of promise. What's to hope for once the porch is built? We arranged to meet at the director's house to talk about the screenplay. He lived in the suburban-seeming flatlands of LA, his house hard to discern behind the bamboo forest overtaking the property. The roots were slowly upending his foundation like a tooth under a tooth. The floors, because of this slow incursion from below, pitched up and down, and walking through the house, I felt like someone trying to reach an airplane bathroom during a turbulent flight. The director was a fanatical collector, not just of movie posters and movie memorabilia, but also of American bulldogs. One very old, incontinent bulldog had been urinating throughout the house, and presumably other bulldogs before him. And the whole place, windows darkened by the thick stalks of the jumbo bamboo, stank historically. The house extended like a tunnel to an even more lightless inner chamber where his videotapes were kept. The director was, I think it is fair to say, a man who had not received all that life had at one time promised him. I can't explain, even after knowing and meeting him, why. He was charming and generous and alarmingly smart. He possessed in his head an archive of American culture spanning decades. I suppose, yes, he was a little overwhelming when generously sharing his enthusiasms, and maybe even in a process town a bit too enamored of process. But he knew everyone who was anyone from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He had proof of everyone. What I mean by proof. Among his many interests were kung fu films. In the 80s, he'd obtained the rights to a popular Chinese series and, with the help of a partner, re-edited 2 episodes into a single film with an English language soundtrack. This movie was very influential. Around the time when I met the director, he'd recently been contacted by a young and very famous auteur for permission to use a clip from his re-edited kung fu movie. The director was thrilled. He'd wanted to meet the auteur for years. He told the auteur that he had footage of Uma Thurman's mother breastfeeding Uma Thurman's brother. His thinking, the auteur was obsessed with Uma Thurman. Imagine what an opportunity this presented, to see footage of the naked breasts that had nursed Uma Thurman. He told the auteur that he could see this footage if he came to his house. Then the director would sign the papers and give him the permission he wanted. This is, I think, give or take, what eventually happened. The director and I spent a lot of time together that month I lived in LA, that we barely talked about the screenplay. Maybe he didn't want to make the screenplay any more than I wanted to write the script for it. One day we hung out with a deranged actress he thought might be good for the part of Edie. She wore a Mexican sundress and talked for uninterrupted hours about herself, though not one detail of her life do I retain. Often the director told me stories about the talented people and the untalented people, and about those who'd made it and those who hadn't. He was outraged on behalf of certain geniuses who had never gotten their due. He never once expressed bitterness on his own behalf, but I suspect the director believed, and I believed it too, that he'd been unfairly deprived of opportunity and greatness. Far stupider people had succeeded where he had not. At this time, I had not yet read The Goncourts. Only today did I read the following page from their journals, because I'm giving these brothers, these viperous, sulky brothers, a second chance. This is a quote from the Goncourts. If I were really wealthy, I should have enjoyed making a collection of all the muck that celebrities with no talent have turned out. I should get the worst picture, the worst statue of this man and that, and pay their weight in gold. I should hand this collection over to the admiration of the middle classes, and after having enjoyed their stupid amazement at the tickets and the high prices of the objects, I should let myself go off into criticism composed of gall, science, and taste until I foamed at the mouth. Were the director and I still in contact, I might send him this quote. We're not. Promise has a shelf life. Without ever stating as much, we both knew he was never making this movie about Edie, but he was not as close to her life as I would get. A few weeks after meeting the director, my friend's husband, also an Edie fanatic, suggested we drive a few hours north to Santa Barbara and visit the ranch where Edie grew up. We chose not to worry ourselves that the ranch had been donated by the Duke Fuzzy Sedgwick estate to the nearby University for Agricultural Experiments and was surrounded by a fence. We parked on the roadside. We ignored the no trespassing signs. We pried ourselves through the gate. We hiked down to the house. We looked into all the windows. We saw the fireplace where the Sedgwick family photograph with Fuzzy reading a book to his many not yet suicided or motorcycle killed or overdosed children was taken. Then we got busted by the caretaker. He gave us hell. We apologized and he offered to show us around. He didn't understand what we were there to see, however. We were not there to see how non-native grasses behave when planted in Southern California. We were not there to see how formerly extinct varieties behave when reintroduced to their homeland. We were there to understand why the native promise of this one woman, it had long ago been proven, did not survive. So maybe I'll read one more short one. How many minutes was that?
We've got plenty of time.
10 minutes? That was only 10? What? Okay. Now I'm on like a breastfeeding roll, I think. Right? I know we are all on one of those at this point in the semester. It's just lactation all the time. Okay. This is a main one for you.
Thank you.
August 18th. Today I rode back from an island. We'd eaten dinner on this island, my friends and family and I. We'd collectively hauled 1,000 pounds of food and gear to this island in order to survive 3 sunny hours on it. Ours was a motley August crowd. Locals with roots that extended back many generations, locals who'd escaped from New York 20 years ago, an editor, an all but dissertation philosophy professor, a writer, an artist, 2 men who run silent meditation retreats in Majorca and Nepal, 3 men named Ben, a lot of children. The party extended horizontally along the beach. The mood was light, but also inevitably charged. Islands make people competitive, maybe because the subconscious fear of shipwreck and survival permeates even the most casual outings. Who will lead the masses when the weather turns and the food runs out? Who will be sacrificed to feed the starving, useful people, the ones who can fish and make fires and sing morale-building sea shanties? I often contemplate my odds of surviving a shipwreck and how to improve them. When I was breastfeeding, I nurtured a lot of shipwreck fantasies. What if I were shipwrecked with my baby and 10 adults on an island with a large box of Clark bars? Wouldn't it be best if I ate the Clark bars and breastfed everyone on the island? Because my body would transform the worthless sugar into valuable fat and protein. Wouldn't that prove to be the wisest survival strategy? And wouldn't that guarantee I'd never be killed for food? I was no longer breastfeeding on this particular island trip. I had to prove my indispensability in other ways. So I swam and swam and swam. I could maybe dive for lobsters. I could maybe go for help. That's what my eternal swimming said to the people sitting on the beach. I swam while others drank beer and slowly realized that they too would have to swim, or maybe be killed. My individual survival was clearly essential to the survival of the group. Was theirs? I don't think I've ever seen so many people swim on an island trip before. The water is probably 53 degrees out there. Then, near hypothermic, we ate the food we brought and not each other. We watched the sunset and quelled our panic that we'd have to spend the night because the boat wouldn't start or possibly it would sink. We loaded the scow with bags and people and transferred them to the lobster boat. I decided to row back to the mainland in a dinghy. I rowed with the artist and his squid-loving son. The son fished and caught a sandbar. His father bit the line loose with his teeth. As the moon rose and the sun definitively set and we were in darkness, I told them the true story of Boone Island. Boone Island is a long pile of rocks located 6 miles off the southern coast of Maine. In December 1710, a ship called the Nottingham Galley ran aground on this rock, which measured then and measures now 300 by 700 feet. The 14 survivors lasted 24 days during the winter. They did eat one another in order to pull off this astonishing feat. Boone Island, published in 1956, is a thinly fictionalized account of their endeavor, written by Kenneth Roberts. Maine children are, or were in the 80s, assigned to read Boone Island for English class. Should our own personal hardships overwhelm us, well, we should be thankful our feet weren't turning to translucent sponges in our boots. I guess this was the lesson, or maybe this is too cliched an understanding of why we were assigned this book in English class, buck up, and etc. This is so prevalent an attitude in Maine that we didn't need a formal education to learn it. The takeaway horror of Boone Island was far more existential. Yes, these men were freezing and eating one another, but the cruelest factor of their island internment was this: they could see smoke rising from the house chimneys ashore. As they suffered, they could watch the cheery proof of people warming themselves by fires and cooking food that wasn't, an hour ago, a friend. That struck me as far worse punishment than simply being shipwrecked on a rock. It seemed an appropriate metaphor for being marooned in Maine as a kid. There was another world out there. You could watch it nightly on TV, but how could you reach it? On a windless night without a current, the row from the island back to shore is an easy one. I was no longer proving my indispensability to the group. I simply wanted to take the slow way to shore under the half moon because summer is almost over, and these are the quiet, twilight moments that, if properly collected and preserved, help me survive the New York winter. I started amassing these moments during the final weeks of August. I must salt supplies for storage. They must last me until I can return to this place I angled for years to leave. I could stop there. Yeah? One more? Okay, let me see. Blah, blah. Artist, luck, people crying, husband almost poisoning himself. How about that? You want that? Near poisoning of husband? Today, my husband poisoned himself by accident. Or this is what we fear. His was an honest mistake. We do not speak enough German to know what we're buying at the market. We've been trusting our ability to identify objects by sight, i.e. without relying on labels and language. At an overpriced health food market, we saw a large bag of reasonably affordable almonds. We bought them. At home, we remarked on the incredibly almondy taste of these almonds. In Germany, everything tastes like an artificially amped up version of itself. Raspberries taste strongly of raspberry, tomatoes of tomato, Heineken of Heineken, and so on. It made sense that the almonds would taste measurably more like almonds than the almonds we ate in the States. But these almonds were far tinier than almonds usually are. We became curious. What was up with these almonds? We decided to Google the word on the label. Apricot. The topmost hit was a website introduced by the following text, translated from the original German. Disease is not an accident, not even fate, and certainly not evil intention of the love of God. Disease is the result of our own homemade error on mental and physical level. Only if you are willing to correct mistakes by yourself, you are also ready to be healthy again. We were willing to correct mistakes. We were ready to be healthy again. We clicked another link that informed us bitter apricot kernels were what we bought. Bitter apricot kernels, we learned from, quote, the official website of vitamin B12, are no plain nut and maybe not even a food. Primarily, they are a hotly contested alternative cancer therapy. According to some people, bitter apricot kernels are poisonous. They contain cyanide. Because of this, the recommended daily dosage is 1 to 2 nuts. My husband had eaten 14. I reasoned with him. I am committed to reasoning away his illness and his pain in the same way that I am committed to reasoning him out of the diet beliefs he maintains for the sake of his health. I can expertly talk him out of experiencing what he believes he experiences and maybe even experiences. Fortunately, illness is almost always illogical. I exploit the holes. It says here, I said, reading from another website, that while the UK believes consuming anything over 2 or 3 bitter apricot kernels means you'll die of cyanide poisoning, the Hunzas Wait, who were the Hunzas? They sounded like a sci-fi tribe of distant planetary origin whose digestive systems would not resemble our own. I did some quick rewriting in my head. I mean, the people in Afghanistan who harvested these nuts eat dozens and dozens by the day. This fact did not assuage either of us. Look at this bag, I said. I fake almost dropped it. The bag was so heavy, it weighed 500 grams. If you could eat only 2 to 3 nuts a day, this bag would last 10 years. And also, why would they sell a bag this big without a warning? Together we examined the packaging. There were a lot of words on the label, and granted, we did not know what any of them meant, but I reminded him that we knew what warnings looked like. There was nothing visually alarmist about the label at all. There was nothing to indicate that this was a bag of death. There were pictures of blossoms, which I suppose could be meant in the funereal sense, the death and rebirth sense. I recalled a book about nuclear waste buried in a mountain and how the waste's deathly potency would outlast the English language. The officials in charge of responsibly protecting the people of the future from the toxic waste did not know how, in the absence of language, to warn these people not to disturb the mountain. They experimented with pictures and symbols, what might constitute a pictorially or symbolically timeless death warning. Maybe blossoms. Also, I said, there's no way the Germans would have bags of cyanide on the grocery store shelves. Anything in Germany that might remind a person of World War II has been either eradicated from view or memorialized by a huge stone monument. Hitler killed himself with cyanide. There's no way the Germans would put an unmarked, i.e. unmemorialized, bag of cyanide on the grocery shelves, not least because we bought the Apricot and Kernels at the Kaiser's grocery store that was located less than a kilometer from the Wannsee conference house, which is where the final solution, if you don't know, was solved? I don't know. What do you say about the final solution? I'm sorry, but tell me the Germans had not thought about this. It made me wish, however, that we'd come up with a list of ways we might die in Germany that would permit us to laugh at each other's funerals. I had a boyfriend with dark-humored brothers who generated such lists. When my boyfriend moved to Japan to study the Japanese sword, he gave his brothers permission to laugh at his funeral if A, he died eating blowfish, or B, accidentally harikari'd himself with his own weapon. Surely the unintentional cyanide overdose of a half-Jew in Wannsee would qualify as grounds for laughing. Meanwhile, my husband was upstairs trying to work. I called up the staircase. "Are you dead yet?" He said he felt nauseous. "Me too," I said cheerfully. "I'm so tired right now, I'm sick." It was true. We were still not over our jet lag. Later, he came downstairs for lunch and complained of a headache. "We haven't been drinking much water," I said. "You're probably dehydrated." It was kind of him to tolerate my optimism. Who knows what will happen when we're older, when he's really dying of cancer or something, or if we're in a car accident. I imagined myself after a car accident reasoning with his decapitated body. "You'll be fine, you're just dehydrated. The Hunzas grow new heads by the dozens." What it comes down to is this. I just need him to believe me that he's not going to die. I need to win this fight more than any of the others I've won, so I can prove to us both that I'm right. All right, I'll stop there. Okay, so obviously my husband didn't get to be anonymized. His identity wasn't fully scrubbed from this, yeah, everybody else's was. But that did lead to some, not marital problems, maybe some small marital problems. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has, or just talk a little bit. I can talk. Incessantly. Does anyone here keep a diary? Can I ask? Come on, people. All right. Has anyone ever in their lives, not now, kept a diary? Okay, thank you. There we go. Who keeps a journal? You keep both. Do you keep both?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
I think in the diary I just write subconsciously, while in my journal I put down the dates and my location.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I mean, I asked just because I struggled a tiny bit with calling this a diary. The reason I called it a diary is because I kind of wanted to return to my original, the thing that I first wrote ever, which was a diary. As a kid, I wrote from like 8 to 13, and I wrote every day, and I was very regimented about it. But weirdly, I did with my diary what you did with your journal, which was it was like just total kind of data. I mean, it was like, today, Officer Friendly came and taught us about the new right on red law that's going into effect on May 1st, you know, I mean, stuff like that. But then when I was older, I kept a journal when I was in my 20s, and I wanted to like, whatever, when I wanted to write something that I thought of as being sort of like a posthumous document that I couldn't wait for people to unearth from my chests of buried papers and, you know, then write theses about or whatever. So I did struggle for a moment, because I feel like diary is seen maybe as like a kind of feminized form. And then I had a moment of thinking, well, no, you guys probably haven't read this, but there's like a kid's book phenom right now called it's a diary by a boy, but it's called Diary of a Wimpy Kid, right? So that didn't really help my cause, or didn't really do much to dissuade me from thinking that maybe the diary is seen as a wimpy form, a feminized form. Not that I have any problems with that, but I just felt, you know, as a woman writing today, you're always fighting not to be pigeonholed in some way or another. So I had a moment of thinking, I wasn't going to call it a diary. But then in the end, I just thought, fuck it. That's what it was. That's what it is. That's how I saw it. And then it seemed kind of fun to then kind of thumb my nose a little bit at what people might expect a diary to be. But that's also partially where the marital problems came in, because I think my husband was like, it's a diary and you don't really write about me at all. Aren't you supposed to write about like the person you really love a lot? So I added some more things about him. Yes, I did. Anyways, yeah. Any questions that anyone has? Yeah.
At what point did you start conceiving of this as a book?
That's a really good question. Okay, so I didn't conceive of this as a book when I started writing it. And Ethan's interestingly brought up plot. So plot is something I feel quite addicted to. Whenever I sit down to write fiction, I find myself kind of against my will, suddenly embroiled in a very, very complicated plot. And I wanted to free myself from that addiction. And so, and that was sort of one like kind of artistic goal. And then I had a personal goal, which was, I was diagnosed with this, fortunately misdiagnosed with a really awful autoimmune disease that had I had it, according to one very optimistic medical website, a doctor said, it won't kill you, but you'll wish it did, because the pain is so terrible. And I was suddenly, in the weeks that I was misdiagnosed with this thing and in pain, I suddenly realized, I was very lucky. I made it to my 40s before I had this realization. Many people have this realization much earlier, which is like the body is a very unreliable container for the self. And when it goes, then suddenly yourself becomes a little bit hard to access, and it's certainly very hard to communicate it to other people. And I had small kids, and I suddenly was like, oh my God, they're never going to know what an awesome person I am. They're just going to know me as this like grumpy, like bedridden person. And so, so then when I recovered from this, I suddenly thought, okay, well, before something strikes again, or just before I die, I want to sort of like download this self. I just want to download it into like, an off-site storage container that can be slightly more reliable than the body. And so that was sort of the thinking behind writing this. It was kind of for my kids, and then also a way for me to try to overcome some like artistic gullies, or just to kind of like get myself out of a routine that I didn't seem otherwise able to like release myself from. And then the other thing I actually did, which I write about in here, there's a lot about objects and object obsessions in this book. And so I had an obsession, I still have it, with this tap handle, which is like a hot and cold water tap, and it was like from the 1800s probably, and I found it in the wall of our house. because people used to just put shit in the walls, like to keep the house warm, tap handles, bones, but seriously, bones and stuff. There's like tons of stuff in your walls if you own an old house. And this thing really obsessed me, and I couldn't really figure out how to like own it. Like I couldn't just possess it. It just kind of wasn't enough. And so I don't draw at all. And so I had this kind of double approach to writing every day, which was I would sit down and I would draw this tap handle, right? And so I have like a whole notebook just of all these really pretty bad, honestly, drawings. And then, but that would like, again, like get my head out of whatever usual groove it would tend to fall into, and I would start to write. And then I was also just writing this diary, and for some reason starting with today that just instantly, I actually love that you use the word wormhole, because I have been using the word portal, but then my students the other day were like, they're really down on the word portal. I don't know why. Do you guys not like that word either? I don't know, they were just like, that's such a terrible word, they hate that word, it makes them think of fantasy novels they don't respect. And so at any rate, so but I did see it as like somehow today I allowed me to kind of wormhole into time a little bit, even though it's technically today, but it was almost just like this very stable time framework that allowed you to operate within that framework, or just to kind of like burrow in and kind of hop anywhere. It was kind of like a time machine in a weird way. So yeah, anyways, and so then I just like kept writing it and writing it and writing it and writing it. And then suddenly I was like, whoa, well, I mean, it could be a book. But then I had to figure out how to organize it, because there was so much of it, and not all of the entries were, well, either I didn't want to publish them because they were too personal, or they weren't good enough. And so that's when I weeded them all out. And then I had this sort of failed organizational attempt where I printed out every single entry so that it was its own movable piece. And then I made topics up and I put them all on the rug, and then it was like playing cards kind of, and I just like sorted all the entries into these different topics. And then I thought, oh, we'll just have topics. But then suddenly I was like, oh, but children and weather belong in the same whatever, like that's the same category. And so then all the categories started collapsing, and then suddenly I just had one big pile again. So that failed as a structural attempt. And then I had this conversation with this writer where I was kind of hand-wringing about it all, and he just looked at me and he was like, I just really think you're overthinking this. And that was actually just such a liberating thing for someone to say. And I was like, you're right, I'm totally overthinking this. And so then I just thought, all right, I'm gonna do this. This is only gonna make sense as a form to some people in this room, but I started to think of it as a mixed tape, if anybody has ever made one of those. Some people are shaking their heads, some people don't know what I'm talking about, but right, like a mixed tape again, right, you'd have to kind of decide this song, and then this song, and then sometimes you put a third song on, and then you'd go back to the beginning and you'd listen all the way through, and you'd be like, what do I want to hear next? I want, this song. And so that's sort of how I ended up structuring the book. So I wanted it to kind of have a little bit of almost like a mixtape would take you through different kind of emotional ups and downs. So that's why it's out of order. And that's why there's lots of entries missing, because that's the stuff I didn't want anyone to read. So anybody else have any other questions about diaries? Poem? Yeah, good.
One more question. Anybody? Oh, bad timing.
Yes, sold.
I guess I have a question then.
Yeah.
I mean, because before this, you've written essays, but you've also written 4 novels that were great, and plot was something. So have you gone back now to writing fiction?
I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And it's funny. So anyways, this panel I was on last night, I was hand-wringing again about like, oh, what if I never write fiction again? I'm so worried I'm never going to write fiction again. I don't know what the next book I'm going to write. And this other person, Sarah Manguza, who I was on the panel with, she actually wrote, weirdly, like the companion book to this book. She wrote a book called Ongoingness, the end of a diary. So she has written a diary that's like 800,000 words or something. And so then she wrote a book about the diary but it's super spare. She's like such a spare writer, and weirdly, like our books should be read together because mine's the book she didn't write, and hers is the book I didn't write. And anyway, she just sort of looked at me and she's just like, I worry about a lot of things, but I don't worry about that. I don't worry about what genre my next book's gonna be. And maybe there is I think I think if you start as a novelist, I don't know, I feel like I've forsaken some kind of self that I need to go back to, or I feel like I figured out something using this form that I want to figure out how to apply it to fiction. And I'll be honest, like I tried to write a story this summer and it just was abysmal. And I don't know how to take what I've learned yet and apply it. But it is about like how to begin something and how to end something and how to make your way through space without that logic proof of plot, right? So how to apply that to fiction, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out. And maybe I never will. I don't know. Okay. Thank you guys so much.